I used to be an average guy, living in a small town with big dreams but limited resources. Growing up, I always admired entrepreneurs, the ones who seemed to have it all figured out. They'd talk about hard work, persistence, and luck. It all sounded so easy, but it wasn't. The road to success is never as clear as it seems, and the moments of triumph are often preceded by years of struggle. Let me take you through my journey, one that started with failure after failure but ended up teaching me the most valuable lessons of my life. Back in 2014, I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of college with a degree in marketing. I had worked a few odd jobs during school, but nothing that paid well enough to live comfortably. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I wasn't broke either. I was somewhere in between, just living day by day, dreaming of something bigger. I had always wanted to start my own business, but honestly, I didn't know where to begin. I had no real direction. The turning point came one day when I was browsing through a local bookstore and stumbled upon a book about digital marketing. I'd heard about it, but I didn't fully understand how powerful it could be. The idea that you could build a business and market it to thousands of people online was revolutionary to me. This was the light bulb moment. I wanted to be part of this world. I started diving into every piece of content I could find: videos, blogs, online courses. I spent hours learning about SEO, social media marketing, email campaigns, and paid ads. I thought I could master it all in a couple of months. Well, spoiler alert, I didn't. In 2015, I took the plunge. I launched my first digital marketing agency. I had no clients, no network, and barely any experience, but I was determined. I made a website, created a few social media profiles, and started offering my services online. I thought that if I built it, they would come. Boy, was I wrong. Weeks went by with no sign of interest. I pitched myself to every business I could find, but the responses were either non-existent or negative. Months passed, and I started to doubt myself. The savings I had from my day job were quickly dwindling, and I was putting in more hours than I ever had before. The stress was starting to pile up. One night, after another sleepless week, I found myself sitting in front of my laptop at 2 a.m., reading a rejection email from a local business I had pitched. I wanted to give up. I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But something inside me told me to try one more time. I didn't know what it was, but I felt this strange, almost desperate drive to keep pushing forward. I started reassessing everything I had been doing. I realized that while I was focused on digital marketing techniques, I had completely ignored one important aspect: building relationships. I hadn't networked enough, and I hadn't listened to potential clients' needs. I decided to change my approach. Instead of sending cold emails and generic proposals, I started focusing on building relationships. I reached out to small business owners in my area, offering free consultations. I gave advice, answered questions, and tried to show them that I genuinely cared about their business. Slowly but surely, things started to change. A few businesses agreed to take me on, and within 6 months, I landed my first big contract with a local retail store. That contract turned into more contracts, and soon, I was able to hire a small team. We worked around the clock to grow our clients' businesses. I started seeing results, not just for them, but for us too. As we grew, we refined our processes and discovered what worked best. But even with the success, I wasn't satisfied. I knew that while we were helping our clients, we weren't doing enough for ourselves. That's when I got the idea to create an online course. I thought about how many people were just like me, people who wanted to learn digital marketing but didn't have the time or resources to go back to school. I wanted to provide them with the same tools and knowledge that helped me build my business. So, I started creating the course, and it took months to perfect. There were late nights, countless revisions, and a lot of self-doubt, but in 2017, I launched my first digital marketing course. The course was an instant hit. Within the first month, I had hundreds of students. I kept improving it, adding more content, and engaging with the community. Over time, the course became one of the leading resources in my niche. The money started rolling in from course sales, and I realized that this was the key to scaling my business in ways I hadn't imagined before. However, as my business grew, so did the challenges. I had employees now, and with employees came responsibility. I had to manage not just the clients and projects, but also the team, the finances, and the future of the business. I was faced with tough decisions daily, decisions that affected people's lives. Some days, it felt like too much to handle, but I kept pushing through. I had been through worse before. In 2019, my agency was officially profitable. We had grown to a team of 10, and I had clients from across the globe. My reputation as a digital marketing expert had spread, and I began to get invitations to speak at conferences and events. It was surreal, but as exciting as it was, I knew that I couldn't rest on my laurels. The digital landscape was constantly changing, and if I didn't keep up, I'd be left behind. So, I continued to innovate. I started branching out into other areas, including software development. I created a few tools to help small businesses with automation and analytics. Those tools brought in additional revenue streams, which helped stabilize the business even more. By 2021, my company was making 7 figures a year. I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. There have been days where I've wanted to quit, days when I've been so stressed out that I couldn't sleep, and moments when I've questioned everything. But looking back, I realized that every failure, every setback, and every sleepless night has been worth it. The business I built didn't happen overnight. It took years of grinding, learning from mistakes, and constantly evolving. I still remember those early days, sitting alone in my small apartment, wondering if it was all going to work out. Now, I have a team, a growing business, and the freedom to do things I never thought were possible. I'm not rich by the standards of the billionaires I read about, but I'm successful in my own right. I'm living a life that I designed. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that persistence is everything. The road will be rough, and there will be moments when you'll want to quit. But if you can push through those moments, learn from your failures, and keep your vision clear, the rewards are worth it. The biggest mistake I ever made was giving up too soon. The second biggest mistake was thinking I couldn't do it. You can. Just keep going. Now, every time I look back at the journey from where I started to where I am now, I know it's the persistence, not the shortcuts, that got me here. If I can do it, anyone can. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. A few years ago, I found myself in a pretty tough spot. I was 28, stuck in a dead-end job, and drowning in student loan debt. My workday consisted of answering emails for a software company, but I was stuck in a department with little to no opportunity for growth. I was bored out of my mind. The people I worked with were nice enough, but none of us were particularly passionate about the work we were doing. It felt like we were all just trying to get by, clocking in and clocking out. One day, after another dull meeting where the same points were raised, I decided to make a change. I was tired of the routine and wanted something more, something I could be proud of. At the time, I didn't even know what that something was, but I knew I had to leave the comfort zone of my job and try something new. The first idea I had was to start a blog. I'd always loved writing, and people had told me for years that I was good at it. I'd read stories about how people made money from blogging, selling products, and creating content. I thought, why not? How hard could it be? I bought a domain name, set up a website, and started writing. At first, it was just me writing about random topics, my favorite movies, books, and life experiences, but my traffic was virtually non-existent. I spent months tweaking the design of the site, learning about SEO, and experimenting with different writing styles. Slowly but surely, my readership grew. It wasn't much, maybe 100 or so visitors a day, but it was a start. I began incorporating affiliate marketing into my content and monetizing through ads. The income was small, but it was something. I made a few $100s a month, but I had to keep my day job to survive. Then, something unexpected happened. One evening, while doing research for a blog post, I stumbled upon a video about dropshipping. The concept sounded simple. You find a product supplier, create an online store, and sell their products without having to handle inventory. The more I looked into it, the more intrigued I became. It felt like the perfect next step. I spent the next few weeks reading everything I could about dropshipping, learning about Shopify, and finding suppliers. I decided to focus on a niche that I was passionate about: home fitness. I'd been into fitness for years, and the rise of home workout products during the pandemic made it a perfect market. I set up an online store, imported products from a supplier, and launched it in a weekend. I was so excited, I could barely sleep. But when I opened the store the next morning, there were no sales. Zero. Zilch. Nada. I spent hours trying to figure out why. I thought the site looked great. I had set up Facebook and Instagram ads, so why wasn't anyone buying? That's when I realized I had made a rookie mistake. I wasn't targeting the right audience. My ads were generic, and I wasn't speaking to the specific needs of my target customers. I had to go back to the drawing board. I spent the next few months refining my store. I learned about customer personas and started tailoring my marketing to address specific pain points. I began creating high-quality content for my blog, offering free workout tips and product reviews, and I even started creating short workout videos to post on social media. I also worked on improving my ads, testing different versions, and adjusting them based on performance. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. One by one, sales started coming in. I was ecstatic. The first time I saw a notification that someone had purchased something from my store, I couldn't believe it. It was a small order, but it felt like a major victory. I had to stop myself from calling my family and friends to announce my success. The next few months were a blur. My store started growing faster than I had anticipated. I reinvested every penny I made back into the business. I expanded my product line, added new marketing channels, and hired a virtual assistant to help with customer service. My day job was becoming more of a distraction than anything, so I began scaling back my hours. Eventually, after about 6 months of consistent growth, I reached a point where my side business was bringing in more income than my day job. I was thrilled but also terrified. I had always played it safe, and now I was in uncharted territory. The thought of leaving my steady job to run my own business was both exciting and terrifying at the same time. I had always been scared of failure, but at the same time, I knew I could never go back to the monotonous grind of my old life. After many sleepless nights and long discussions with my partner, I decided to take the plunge. I quit my job, and for the first time in years, I was my own boss. The freedom was incredible, but so was the pressure. There were days when I felt completely overwhelmed, wondering if I had made the right decision. But every time I faced a challenge, I remembered why I had started this journey in the first place: to build something of my own and never feel stuck again. The business continued to grow, and I began expanding into new markets. I hired a small team of freelancers to help with marketing and product sourcing. I started networking with other entrepreneurs, sharing advice, and learning from their mistakes. I was now part of a community of like-minded individuals, which was both inspiring and humbling. Fast forward to today, and my business has turned into something I'm incredibly proud of. I've expanded my product range, built a brand, and created a loyal customer base. What started as a tiny blog and a dropshipping store has grown into a fully fledged e-commerce business with employees, suppliers, and even a physical warehouse. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at how terrified I was to leave my job. I had been so afraid of failing that I didn't realize how many opportunities one was missing by staying in my comfort zone. I've learned that success doesn't happen overnight, and it takes grit, perseverance, and the willingness to fail in order to succeed. If there's one thing I've learned through this entire journey, it's that you can't wait for the perfect time to make a change. There will always be risks, and there will always be obstacles, but as long as you keep moving forward, you can build something amazing. I'm still growing my business and learning new things every day, but I'm proud of how far I've come. And for anyone reading this who is stuck in a job they hate or feeling like they don't know what their next step should be, take that first leap. It's worth it, even if you fall flat on your face a few times. Because in the end, the only failure is never trying at all. I started my entrepreneurial journey out of sheer necessity. It was 2016, and I was living in a small, overpriced apartment in Brooklyn with a couple of roommates. I had just graduated with a degree in English literature, which, as you can imagine, didn't exactly scream job security or financial stability. My friends were either in tech, finance, or still figuring out what to do with their lives. I, on the other hand, was stuck in a series of dead-end jobs, waiting tables and working at a retail store that barely paid the rent. But something inside me knew I wasn't made for the 9-to-5 grind. I'd always been creative, and I wanted to build something I could call my own. I had no money to start with, but I had ideas, and I was willing to hustle. I spent most of my nights researching online, reading articles, watching videos, and trying to learn anything and everything about starting a business. The turning point came one evening while I was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram. I noticed a bunch of small businesses popping up in my feed, each selling unique products. They weren't from big corporations. They were from people like me, regular folks who had decided to take a leap. It hit me. I could create something too. And that's when it all clicked. Why not create a business around something I loved, something that was personal to me? I had always been passionate about art, design, and vintage clothing. I thought, what if I could sell curated vintage pieces online with a unique twist, while also providing a platform for emerging artists to showcase their work? I immediately started brainstorming names for the business, and after a week of throwing out ideas, I settled on Retro Reverie. I had no inventory, no money for a website, and no real business experience. But I had something more important: determination. I began sourcing vintage clothing and artwork from thrift stores, flea markets, and even my own closet. It was all about finding pieces that had a story behind them, things that felt special. I also reached out to local artists, offering them the chance to sell their work on my platform in exchange for a small commission. The first step was to create an Instagram account. I knew that if I could build a following, I could eventually make sales. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be easy. I had no brand recognition, no credibility, and no experience with social media marketing. So, I started small. I took high-quality photos of the vintage items I'd sourced, wrote engaging captions, and used popular hashtags. At first, I didn't get much attention. But after a few weeks, things began to pick up. People were commenting on my posts, asking about the items I was selling. I could feel momentum building, and it was thrilling. But there was one problem: I didn't know how to set up an online store. I tried building a website on my own using WordPress, but it looked terrible. I knew I needed something more professional, something that could handle transactions seamlessly. After doing some more research, I discovered Shopify. It was easy to use, affordable, and perfect for a first-time entrepreneur like me. I bought a template and started uploading products. The first sale came as a huge shock. I remember the exact moment. My phone buzzed, and there it was, a notification saying I had made my first sale. It was a vintage leather jacket, priced at $60. I couldn't believe it. Someone had actually paid money for something I had put together. I immediately messaged the buyer, thanking them, and shipped the jacket off the next day. It wasn't much, but it felt like the beginning of something real. I didn't make much money in the first few months, but I kept pushing. I used every free resource I could find to improve my marketing. I watched YouTube videos on Instagram ads, joined online business groups, and listened to podcasts about entrepreneurship. Slowly but surely, I began to see growth. I reinvested every penny I made back into the business. I bought more inventory, hired a photographer to improve the quality of my product photos, and spent hours learning how to market better. I also started a blog on my website where I could write about the stories behind the vintage items I was selling and interview artists I worked with. This added a personal touch that connected me with my customers. 6 months in, I had gained a small but loyal following. The next big step was moving beyond just Instagram. I started running paid ads, which at first were a bit of a gamble. But after tweaking my ad targeting and learning how to optimize my campaigns, I began to see a steady increase in sales. I also partnered with influencers in the fashion and art world, sending them free items in exchange for a shout-out. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes I wondered if I was wasting my time, but I kept going. It paid off. By 2018, Retro Reverie was making a modest profit. I had expanded beyond vintage clothing and was now selling home decor, jewelry, and artwork. I even launched a small line of custom-designed t-shirts featuring artwork from local artists I worked with. It felt amazing to see the business grow, but I knew I had to keep innovating to stay ahead of the competition. That's when I decided to launch a subscription box service, where customers would receive a curated selection of vintage items, exclusive artist prints, and other unique products each month. The idea took off, and within a year, it became one of my most popular offerings. I eventually hired a small team to help with the growing workload: an operations manager, a marketing specialist, and a customer service representative. This was a huge step for me because, for the longest time, I had done everything myself. But having a team allowed me to focus more on the creative side of the business and strategy. Fast forward to 2023, and Retro Reverie is now a full-fledged e-commerce business with a solid customer base and a recognizable brand. We've expanded to include not only vintage clothing and art, but also home goods, accessories, and collaborations with well-known artists. I've been able to travel the world, visiting markets and galleries to source unique products for the store, and I even opened a small physical pop-up shop in New York City last year. There are still days when I feel overwhelmed and wonder if I'm doing the right thing. But when I think about how far I've come, from that broke kid in Brooklyn to running my own business, I can't help but feel proud. I didn't take the easy route. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and there were times when I doubted myself, but I stuck with it. To anyone out there thinking about starting a business, my advice is simple: just start. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it'll never come. You don't need a lot of money or fancy connections to begin. You just need an idea, a willingness to learn, and the persistence to keep going when things get tough. Believe me, it's worth it. I never thought I'd be in a position to write a success story. In fact, just a few years ago, I was drowning in debt, struggling to pay rent, and barely keeping my head above water. My journey is one of failure, resilience, and luck, but I've learned that success isn't just about having a good idea. It's about not giving up when everything seems like it's falling apart. It all started in 2017. I was fresh out of college, having majored in marketing. The degree didn't land me a high-paying job, as I had hoped, but it did get me into the workforce. I took a marketing assistant role at a small digital marketing agency. I had big dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, but reality hit hard when I realized how low I was on the totem pole. It was an entry-level job with a decent paycheck, but I had very little control over my work or career trajectory. I felt stuck, like I was just another cog in the wheel. One day, in a fit of frustration, I did what I'd always dreamed of. I quit my job and started working on my own marketing agency. I had 0 clients, no savings, and practically no experience in running a business. But what I had was a burning desire to succeed. I started reaching out to small businesses in my local area, offering to help them improve their online presence. At first, it was just cold calls, emails, and a whole lot of rejection. But after a couple of weeks, I got my first client, a local bakery that needed help with its website and social media. The first month was a blur of late nights, learning on the fly, and doing everything from designing websites to managing Facebook ads. I barely made any money, but I had enough to cover my basic expenses. It wasn't glamorous, but I was doing something I loved, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. I kept pushing forward, reaching out to more businesses, tweaking my pitch, and learning from every mistake. Slowly, my client base started to grow. By the end of the first year, I had a handful of clients. I had learned a lot, but I still wasn't making a real profit. The bills were piling up, and I was constantly hustling to find new clients just to stay afloat. I was also realizing that I had no idea how to scale my business. I was doing everything myself, from the client work to the accounting, and it was burning me out. It was around this time that I had an epiphany. I needed to build a team. I couldn't do everything on my own, and if I was going to grow, I had to let go of some of the work. I hired my first employee, a talented designer who I met at a local networking event. Together, we started to take on larger projects, and I began to understand the value of delegation. As the team grew, so did the complexity of our projects. I hired more employees, including a content manager and an SEO expert, and we began to specialize in a few key areas of digital marketing. I won't lie, the growth wasn't easy. There were constant challenges. One of the hardest lessons I learned was that not all clients are good clients. Some of them demanded too much for too little pay, while others didn't respect our expertise. I learned to fire clients, something I never thought I would have the guts to do. But once I started focusing on quality over quantity, things started to shift. The turning point came in 2020. I had spent years building my agency, but it still wasn't where I wanted it to be. Then the pandemic hit. At first, it was chaos. We lost several clients almost overnight as businesses shut down, and I was terrified. But I quickly realized that many companies were moving online in a way they never had before. They needed digital marketing more than ever, and they were willing to pay for it. I doubled down on my efforts, refining our services to focus on e-commerce businesses. I also invested in online courses to expand my own knowledge, especially around paid advertising and conversion rate optimization. I spent weeks tweaking our service offerings, updating our marketing materials, and reaching out to new leads. The work paid off. In the second half of 2020, we saw a huge surge in demand, and our revenue grew by 250%. By 2021, my agency was finally starting to run smoothly. I had a solid team, loyal clients, and the freedom to focus on the strategic side of the business. I also had the financial stability I had always dreamed of, though I still worked long hours, sometimes too many. But what was different now was that I had built something sustainable. It wasn't just me scrambling to survive, it was a business that was growing and thriving. Fast forward to today, and my agency is doing better than I ever imagined. We've expanded to working with international clients, and we've even started creating our own digital products, such as courses and templates for small businesses. Our revenue continues to grow, and I've hired more people, allowing me to focus on building a brand, which has always been my long-term goal. But the journey hasn't been without its setbacks. I've experienced a fair share of failures along the way. The early years were filled with mistakes, like overpromising to clients, underpricing my services, and struggling to find the right people to hire. But I learned from each failure, and those lessons are what shaped the business I run today. I still make mistakes, but they don't feel as big or as daunting anymore. Looking back, I realized that what made the difference wasn't luck or even talent, it was persistence. There were plenty of times when I could have thrown in the towel. I could have kept that safe, comfortable job, but I didn't. I kept going, even when I thought I was about to fail. And that, more than anything else, has been the key to my success. I'm not rich by any means, and I still have a long way to go, but I'm proud of what I've built. There's no magic formula for success, just a lot of hard work, determination, and the ability to pivot when things go wrong. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. If you're willing to fail, learn, and keep going, you can create something amazing, too. It was 2015, and I was sitting in my cramped apartment in downtown Chicago, staring at my computer screen, pondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I had just quit my stable job in marketing to chase a dream of creating something I could call my own. I had no clear plan, no investors, and barely enough savings to keep me afloat for more than a couple of months. But I had a gut feeling. It was the kind of feeling that comes from deep inside, telling you that if you don't take a leap now, you might never have the chance again. I wasn't always an entrepreneur. In fact, growing up, I had never even considered starting my own business. I was the kid who followed the rules, went to college, got good grades, and eventually landed a well-paying job in marketing. It was what I was supposed to do, right? But somewhere along the way, the idea of working for someone else just didn't sit well with me anymore. It all started when I was working on a project for a new client at my marketing job. The company was a small startup, but they were passionate and innovative. I remember spending hours with the founders, learning about their vision for the future. They were doing something new, something no one had thought of before, and they were making waves in their industry. But they didn't have the marketing expertise to make the most of their potential. That's where I came in. I helped them develop a marketing strategy, set up their digital presence, and launch their first major advertising campaign. The results were beyond anyone's expectations. Their sales skyrocketed, and the excitement in their office was palpable. It felt incredible to be a part of that success. But, over time, I realized something. They were the ones building something that could potentially change the world, while I was sitting in an office helping others tell their stories. I wanted that for myself. I started brainstorming business ideas during my free time. It was tough, though. Finding something that had not already been done was harder than I thought. I dabbled with a few ideas, but nothing seemed to have that spark, that potential for something bigger. Then one evening, I was sitting in my living room with my laptop open, scrolling through social media, when I came across an ad for a new type of sustainable packaging. It caught my attention immediately. As a consumer, I had always been frustrated with the amount of plastic waste that seemed to come with everything I bought. I had seen more and more companies embracing eco-friendly practices, but sustainable packaging was still in its early stages, and most options were either too expensive or not quite effective. That's when it hit me. What if I could create a company that specialized in affordable, high-quality sustainable packaging? The idea seemed simple, but I knew it was something that could make a real difference. The environment was becoming an increasingly important issue, and businesses were starting to realize the value of going green, not just for ethical reasons, but because consumers were demanding it. I decided to take the plunge. The next few months were a blur of research, late nights, and countless Google searches. I learned about materials, production processes, and supply chains. I contacted manufacturers and suppliers, trying to find the best sustainable packaging solutions at a reasonable cost. I spent hours talking to experts in the field, trying to understand the challenges that came with producing eco-friendly packaging at scale. I had no experience in manufacturing or logistics, but I was determined to figure it out. By early 2016, I had enough information to move forward. I created a business plan and started reaching out to potential customers. At first, it was slow going. I sent emails, made calls, and attended networking events. But most companies were hesitant to switch to sustainable packaging, either because of the cost or because they were simply unaware of the environmental impact of their current packaging. But I wasn't ready to give up. I began offering free samples to companies in exchange for feedback. I worked with a few small businesses who were willing to take a chance on me. Slowly but surely, my products began to gain traction. My first big break came when a small online retailer reached out and asked to purchase a bulk order of my sustainable packaging for their new product launch. They had been looking for an eco-friendly option, and after trying out my samples, they were sold. That deal didn't just give me the revenue boost I needed, it gave me credibility. Once word got out that my products were being used by an established brand, other companies began to take notice. I started getting more orders, and with each one, I reinvested in the business, improving my products and expanding my offerings. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when I doubted myself. There were times when I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. My savings were running low, and I had no idea how I was going to keep the business afloat. But I kept pushing forward, trusting that if I kept working hard and staying true to my vision, things would eventually work out. By the end of 2017, my small business had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 5 employees. We had a warehouse, a steady stream of customers, and even a small social media following. I was still working long hours, often 14-hour days, but I felt a sense of pride that I had never experienced before. I was building something of my own, and it was succeeding. In 2018, I decided it was time to take the next step. I began seeking investors to help scale the business. I pitched my company to several venture capital firms, and after many rejections, I finally found an investor who believed in my vision. With their help, I was able to expand my operations, hire more employees, and improve my product line. We went from serving a handful of small businesses to working with large corporations who wanted to make the shift to sustainable packaging. Looking back now, I can hardly believe how far we've come. My business is now a leader in the sustainable packaging industry, with clients ranging from small startups to multinational corporations. We've grown into a global company, and our products are sold in over 50 countries. But none of it would have been possible without that leap of faith I took in 2015. It was risky, it was uncertain, but it was worth it. I've learned so much over the years, not just about business, but about resilience, patience, and the importance of believing in yourself. There are still challenges, of course, and I know there will be many more ahead. But today, when I look at my company, I don't just see a business, I see a movement toward a more sustainable future, and a reminder that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. It's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. Take the leap, learn along the way, and most importantly, don't give up. Success doesn't happen overnight, but if you're persistent, it will come. And trust me, when it does, it will feel so much sweeter because you earned it. I was just 23 when I decided to take the leap into entrepreneurship. My name is Mark, and up until that point, I had lived a pretty normal life. I had gone to college, worked part-time jobs, and dreamed of starting my own business one day. I didn't have a rich uncle or a family legacy of entrepreneurs. My family was middle class, and honestly, we didn't have much when it came to extra cash to invest in anything big. I had no idea what I wanted to do at first. I wasn't the kind of person who had always known what their passion was. I didn't have a burning desire to start a tech company, create an app, or open a restaurant. My dream was simpler. I wanted to make money. That's it. I wanted to get out of the 9-to-5 grind and build something that could give me financial freedom. So, I did what most broke, confused 23-year-olds would do. I went on Google. I started reading about different ways to make money. I didn't have any real savings, but I had a credit card and an insane amount of ambition. I stumbled across dropshipping, which seemed like a perfect fit. It was a business model that allowed you to sell products online without holding any inventory. In theory, I could run the business from my bedroom, just a laptop and an internet connection. I thought to myself, how hard could it be? I spent weeks reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and joining Facebook groups dedicated to dropshipping. I soaked up everything I could. I learned about finding suppliers, setting up an e-commerce store, and driving traffic to my website using Facebook ads. I was fired up. I got to work. My first step was picking a niche. After spending hours researching, I chose the pet industry, specifically dog products. I figured everyone loves their dogs, and they're always willing to spend money on their furry friends. I spent a couple $100 on setting up my online store using Shopify, purchased some cheap products from AliExpress, and launched my first ever store, Perfect Supplies. The first week was slow. I wasn't surprised. I knew that it would take time for my website to start generating traffic, but I wasn't prepared for just how much time it would take. I threw money into Facebook ads, trying to reach dog owners, but it didn't work. I spent close to $1,000 on ads with little to no return. My store was getting views, but no one was buying anything. I had to face it. I was losing money. Instead of giving up, I decided to learn from my mistakes. I researched why my ads weren't converting. I quickly realized that my ads weren't targeting the right audience. I had been using broad, generic targeting, but I needed to focus on specific dog breeds, interests, and behaviors. I revamped my ads, narrowed down my audience, and adjusted my approach. The second month was a little better. I started getting a few sales here and there, and slowly, I could see my numbers improving. By the end of the third month, I had made $500 in profit. It wasn't life-changing, but it was progress. I had proven to myself that this was possible. I had learned the basics of digital marketing, and more importantly, I had learned not to give up too soon. As I continued to scale my business, I reinvested every dollar I made into growing my store. I started testing new products, optimizing my ads, and building an email list. Things started to click. By the time I reached 6 months in, I was making $5,000 a month. At that point, I quit my part-time job at a coffee shop and went all in on my dropshipping business. My parents were nervous, but I was confident. The next year was full of challenges. I dealt with frustrated customers, unreliable suppliers, and the constant pressure of trying to stay ahead of the competition. There were nights when I barely slept, working around the clock to ensure that orders were fulfilled, ads were running, and customer support was handled. There were times when I wanted to quit, but I reminded myself that I had built something from the ground up. I couldn't throw it all away now. By the time I turned 25, my store was making over $10,000 a month in profit. It felt surreal. I had gone from being a broke 23-year-old with no real business experience to running a thriving e-commerce business. I could finally afford things I had only dreamed about, like traveling, paying off student loans, and even buying a new car. But more than that, I had gained something far more valuable: freedom. I could work from anywhere, choose my own hours, and most importantly, I was no longer dependent on anyone else's paycheck. Despite the success, I knew I couldn't rest on my laurels. The dropshipping market was saturated and competition was fierce. So, I decided to expand. I started launching my own private label products, worked on building a brand around Perfect Supplies, and created an Instagram page to showcase happy customers with their dogs. I also focused on improving customer experience and scaling my email marketing efforts. Things started to grow even faster. The real turning point came when I realized that I wasn't just selling dog products. I was building a community of dog lovers. I started collaborating with influencers in the pet niche, offering them free products in exchange for exposure. I even sponsored local pet events, and my brand began to gain real recognition. I wasn't just another dropshipping store anymore. I had a loyal customer base and a real brand identity. At 26, I had reached $30,000 a month in profit. I hired a small team to help with customer service and order fulfillment, which freed up my time to focus on scaling even further. I reinvested my profits into expanding my product line and increasing my ad budget. Things were looking up. I even started working on a second brand in the health and wellness space, applying everything I had learned from my dropshipping journey. Now, at 30, I run multiple online businesses, each generating significant income. I still think back to when I was 23 and had no idea what I was doing. The road wasn't easy, and it wasn't always smooth, but it was worth it. There were countless times when I wanted to quit, when I felt like I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship. But looking back, those were the moments that shaped me. They taught me resilience, patience, and how to deal with failure. For anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple: just start. You'll learn more from your mistakes than from your successes. And most importantly, don't give up. If you're willing to put in the work, learn from your failures, and keep going when it gets tough, you can build something incredible. You don't need a big bankroll or a perfect plan, just a willingness to learn and adapt. I did it, and so can you. I never thought I'd be where I am today. The path to success, at least in my case, wasn't lined with golden opportunities or smooth roads. It was a messy, chaotic journey filled with failures, self-doubt, and a ton of hard lessons. It all started back in 2013 when I was in my final year of college. I had big dreams, like any ambitious 22-year-old, but I didn't have much direction. I wasn't sure about my career, my future, or even if I wanted to work a 9-to-5 job. I had tried internships, but nothing seemed to stick. I had the usual worries. How do I find a job that I actually care about? How do I make enough money to live comfortably? Do I even want to work for someone else? One evening, while I was at home feeling particularly down about my lack of direction, I received a call from an old friend. Let's call him Ben. Ben was one of those people who always seemed to have everything figured out. He had his own digital marketing company and had been running it for a couple of years. Ben was one of those entrepreneurs who made me think, I could do that. On the phone, Ben asked me if I wanted to come work for him. He needed help with his marketing efforts and thought I could be a good fit. I was hesitant. The idea of jumping straight into the world of marketing felt daunting, but the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. I didn't want to end up stuck in a regular job, and this seemed like a chance to learn something new while being my own boss in a way. I told Ben I'd think about it. But after a week of mulling it over, I agreed to join his team. The next few months were a blur of excitement and stress. Ben showed me the ropes of digital marketing, SEO, email campaigns, social media ads, and all that jazz. I threw myself into the work, but the reality quickly hit me. It wasn't as easy as it looked. The business wasn't a smooth sail by any means. There were late nights, constant pressure to perform, and a lot of trial and error. But despite the challenges, I loved it. I loved the hustle, the fact that everything was so dynamic, and that if you put in the work, results would eventually show. About 6 months into working with Ben, I started to get frustrated. Not because of the work itself, but because of my lack of control. Ben made most of the decisions. We were essentially doing his vision and following his business plan, not mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to have more ownership over what I was doing. I wanted to run my own show. I had a pivotal conversation with Ben one afternoon that would change everything. I told him I wanted to start my own digital marketing business. Ben, to his credit, wasn't upset. In fact, he was supportive, even though it meant losing me as an employee. He gave me some advice. Start small. Don't burn your bridges. Build a reputation. And always over-deliver. Those words stuck with me, and I made a plan to strike out on my own. I spent the next few months learning everything I could about running a business. I took online courses, read books, and absorbed as much information as I could from any free source. I didn't have a huge budget, but I had determination. My first step was to build a website, which I did myself. It was a simple, no-frills website, but it served its purpose, to show potential clients what I could do. Then, I started cold emailing businesses that I thought could benefit from digital marketing. It was slow at first. I heard no more often than yes, but each time I landed a client, it felt like a victory. I started with small local businesses, restaurants, yoga studios, hair salons. I offered them cheap rates at first, just to build my portfolio. Some of the businesses were happy with the results, others not so much. But with each client, I learned something new. I learned how to tweak campaigns, how to deal with client expectations, and how to market myself. In the first year, I managed to secure a handful of clients. The money wasn't great, but I was making enough to get by, and more importantly, I was learning the ins and outs of running a business. I also made a point of creating long-term relationships with my clients, not just one-off jobs. I always told them, let's work together long-term. I want to see your business grow. This mindset worked because it made clients feel like they were partners in the process. But the breakthrough came a little over a year into my business. One of my clients, a small local gym, hit it big. After a few months of running ads for them and revamping their website, they saw a massive increase in memberships. They were ecstatic. Word of mouth spread, and suddenly, I had several gyms reaching out to me, asking if I could do the same for them. That was the moment when I realized I could scale my business. I focused more on working with gyms and fitness centers, and within 6 months, I had enough clients to hire a couple of freelancers to help with the workload. I didn't need a huge team, just a few people who could help me handle the growing volume of work. By the end of year 3, my business was thriving. I had expanded my services beyond digital marketing to include website design, branding, and even some management consulting for small business owners. I hired a full-time team and built a small office. The money was good, but more importantly, I felt proud. I had built something from nothing, and it felt like a dream come true. However, success didn't come without its own set of challenges. As my business grew, so did the pressure. Managing a team, maintaining client satisfaction, and staying competitive in a crowded market were constant stressors. I had to learn how to delegate, how to manage client relationships, and, most importantly, how to maintain my mental health. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, days when I thought about giving up. But I kept going because I knew I couldn't go back to what I was doing before. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I did was take that leap. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't. But I don't think I would have gotten here if I hadn't taken that first step, even when I had no idea what I was doing. Now, I own a digital marketing agency with a small but passionate team, and we're continuing to grow. My story isn't unique. Lots of entrepreneurs face the same challenges, but it's mine. And it's the story of how I made it happen. It's been a journey filled with ups and downs, but I wouldn't change a thing. Every failure, every lesson, every late night working on a campaign, it's all been worth it. If you're thinking about starting your own business or going after a dream, my advice is simple: do it. It won't be easy, but the rewards are beyond what you could imagine. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. The type of place where your entire life could be summarized in a few sentences, and everyone had a say in what you were doing. As a kid, I remember watching my parents struggle to make ends meet. My dad worked as a mechanic in a tiny garage, while my mom ran a local diner. They were both hardworking, but the money just never seemed to stretch far enough. There was always something missing, like they were constantly treading water but never quite getting ahead. I wasn't an extraordinary student. I didn't have some grand ambition or dream of becoming a doctor, lawyer, or astronaut. In fact, I struggled in school. I had a tendency to get distracted and often daydreamed about doing something different, something outside the confines of the small town. But there was one thing I always knew for sure. I didn't want to live a life like my parents. Not because I didn't love them, because I did, deeply, but because I didn't want to scrape by just to survive. I spent a lot of time after school working part-time jobs, mostly washing dishes at my mom's diner and helping my dad with light work in the garage. Over time, I started to notice something. People were always talking about the same problems: their cars breaking down, the local grocery store being too expensive, or how hard it was to find a good mechanic. It got me thinking, what if I could solve one of these problems? What if I could make something that would help people in a way that actually made their lives easier? The idea of opening my own business started to take shape in my mind. But it wasn't a clear path. It was messy, full of doubts and fears. At first, I thought maybe I'd open a bigger, more modern garage that would cater to the high-end cars in the city nearby. But I quickly realized that the competition in the area was already fierce, and I didn't have the experience or capital to go toe-to-toe with the big names. So I scratched that idea and tried to think of something simpler, more niche. Then, one evening after work, while I was watching a random YouTube video on my phone, I saw an ad about a new service, mobile mechanic services. It was a light bulb moment. What if I could offer car repair services right at people's homes or workplaces? I could save them time and hassle, and it would be more convenient for the customers. No more taking a day off work to get their car fixed. I'd come to them. I didn't have any experience with the business side of things, but I knew mechanics, I knew cars, and I was willing to learn. The next few months were a blur of figuring out the logistics. I started saving any spare cash I had, asking my dad for advice on car repairs and what tools I would need. I even got a loan from the local bank, though I had no idea what I was doing. I bought a van, filled it with tools, and started marketing my mobile mechanic service on social media. It wasn't much, just a simple flyer and a Facebook page, but it was a start. At first, business was slow, really slow. I'd get a call here and there, but nothing steady. I worked on reputation more than anything. I didn't have the advertising budget to run big campaigns, so I relied on word of mouth. I'd offer discounts to the first few clients who were willing to try me out, and I made sure every job was done to perfection. I even stayed late sometimes to make sure that the cars I worked on were running as good as new. People started talking, and slowly, my reputation grew. But even with a growing reputation, things didn't get easy. There were always setbacks. I remember once when I had to replace a transmission in a customer's car, but I didn't have the right part on hand. I had to scramble to get the correct part within hours because the customer was on a tight schedule. I felt the pressure of every job I took on, knowing that my reputation was on the line. I began to realize that owning a business wasn't just about being good at what you do. It was about solving problems quickly and efficiently. I had my first big break when a local delivery company hired me to service their entire fleet. They had about 10 vans that were constantly breaking down, and they needed someone reliable. I didn't have much experience working on delivery vehicles, but I took the job anyway. It was a steep learning curve, but I showed up early every day, worked long hours, and made sure the vans were running better than ever. After that, I started getting more corporate clients. The steady work allowed me to hire a couple of employees, and I expanded the fleet of vans. By the time I was 25, my small mobile mechanic business had grown into a small company with a couple dozen employees and a handful of vans. It wasn't a huge operation, but it was enough to provide a decent income and the satisfaction that I was making a real difference for people. But even as my business grew, the pressure never went away. In fact, it only intensified. As more clients came in, I found myself juggling more responsibilities: staff management, marketing, inventory, bookkeeping, things I never thought I'd have to deal with when I started. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, like I was barely keeping everything together. But what kept me going was the feedback from customers. People were constantly telling me how much they appreciated the convenience of the service. They didn't have to take time off work, and their cars were fixed by someone they trusted. That feedback was my fuel. It reminded me why I started in the first place. Then, one fateful evening, everything changed. It was a rainy Thursday, and I was about to call it a day when my phone rang. It was a big client, a national chain of car dealerships, asking if I could provide services for all their locations. They had been hearing about my reputation and wanted to know if I could handle a much larger scale. My heart raced as I realized the opportunity in front of me. If I took the job, it would mean expanding my business even further. But if I failed, it could put everything at risk. After a sleepless night of tossing and turning, I decided to take the leap. I expanded the business, hired more people, and bought new equipment. The transition was rocky at times. We had to adapt to new systems and workflows to handle the larger volume. But little by little, we made it work. Today, my company is a major player in the mobile mechanic industry. We serve thousands of clients, from individual car owners to corporate fleets. I've gone from a small-town kid with a broken-down van to running a multi-million-dollar business. But I never forget where I came from, and I never take my success for granted. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Entrepreneurship isn't about having a brilliant idea from the start. It's about solving problems, adapting when things go wrong, and never losing sight of the bigger picture. Success doesn't happen overnight, and there's no one-size-fits-all path to get there. But if you're willing to put in the work, stay focused, and adapt when needed, the results can be life-changing. And for the first time in my life, I can honestly say that I'm proud of what I've built. I'm not just scraping by anymore. I'm thriving. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and the most exciting thing that ever happened was the annual county fair. My family didn't have much. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom stayed at home, taking care of us and the house. We were comfortable, but money was always tight. I remember watching my parents struggle to make ends meet, constantly worried about bills and how we'd pay for the little extras that everyone else seemed to take for granted. As a kid, that shaped my view of the world in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. It planted a seed in me, the desire to build something bigger, something that would give me and my family financial security and, ideally, a little extra room for joy. I didn't want to spend my life just scraping by. When I was about 18, I left for college, determined to make something of myself. The transition from small-town life to the big city was a bit of a shock. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I wasn't one of those people who had a clear path laid out. I didn't have a mentor or any special connections. What I had was a lot of grit and the willingness to figure things out along the way. My first job in college was as a waiter at a local diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me some spending money. I quickly realized that working for someone else wasn't for me. The hours were long and the pay wasn't great, but what bothered me the most was the feeling of being stuck. I watched the restaurant owner come in every day, managing the place, making decisions, and honestly, it didn't seem all that hard. I could do that, I thought. I didn't need a fancy degree or a lot of capital to get started. I just needed the right idea and the right work ethic. During one of my shifts, a regular customer struck up a conversation with me. His name was Tim, and he was in the middle of expanding his own business. He owned a small chain of local gyms and had been in the fitness industry for years. He noticed that I was always hustling, always thinking ahead, and one day, he asked me if I'd ever thought about the fitness industry. I didn't know much about it, but I was always interested in health and fitness. We exchanged numbers, and he offered to mentor me, which, looking back, was the first pivotal moment of my entrepreneurial journey. Tim taught me the basics of running a business, from customer service to inventory management to marketing and financial planning. We met regularly, and I soaked up everything he shared. But despite all his advice, I still felt a little lost. I knew I wanted to start something, but what? I didn't want to just open a gym like Tim. There had to be a unique angle I could work with. The breakthrough came when I realized that the problem I wanted to solve was right in front of me. At the time, most gyms were either bare-bones, no-frills types, or high-end, luxury places that required a hefty membership fee. There was very little in between. As a college student with limited funds, I couldn't afford the high-end gyms, but I also didn't want the dirty, uninspiring gyms that were available on the lower end. I wanted something affordable, but with a sense of community and high-quality equipment. I knew I wasn't alone in this desire, and that's when the idea for my gym started to form. I started working on the concept for my business. I wanted to create a gym that catered to people who were looking for something more than just a place to work out, but who also didn't want to break the bank. I began researching everything I could about the fitness industry, reading books, watching documentaries, and attending local business workshops. I learned about the importance of branding, customer loyalty, and how to scale a business. But there was one problem: money. I didn't have much to start with. I'd saved up a small amount from my waiting job, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover the costs of leasing a space, purchasing equipment, and hiring staff. My parents couldn't help me. They didn't have the means. So I did what any broke, determined college student would do. I got creative. I took out a small loan, maxed out my credit cards, and asked for financial help from Tim, who agreed to lend me some money in exchange for a small equity stake in the business. With that, I had enough to move forward. I found a small, rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town and signed a lease. It wasn't much, but I could see the potential. I spent the next few months working late into the night, scraping together every last dollar to buy second-hand equipment, paint the walls, and make the space look decent. I made every single decision by myself, from the gym's layout to the pricing model, trying to create something that would resonate with people in my community. I launched my gym with a modest marketing campaign, mostly using social media and word of mouth. The first month was slow, really slow. I barely covered the rent, and I was working 16-hour days trying to keep everything running. But then something changed. A few regulars came in, people who lived nearby, and they started bringing in their friends. We had something that the other gyms didn't have: a sense of community. People weren't just coming in to lift weights, they were coming in because it felt like home. The word spread, and soon, I had a steady stream of customers. That first year was a blur. There were days when I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake, days when I could barely pay the bills, but there were also moments of triumph. A local fitness influencer did a post about our gym, which gave us a nice boost. I hired a couple of part-time employees to help with the growing demand, and I started focusing more on the long-term vision of the gym. I knew I couldn't stay small forever. After 2 years, I took a huge leap. I expanded. I opened a second location in a neighboring town. This time, I had more resources, and I was able to build a much more professional operation. The success of the first gym gave me the confidence to make this move, but it wasn't without its challenges. I had to manage multiple locations, hire more employees, and deal with increased operational complexities. But with each challenge, I learned and adapted. Today, my gym chain has 6 locations across the state, and we've recently started offering online classes and merchandise. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I've built something that I'm incredibly proud of. My employees love their jobs, and my customers feel like they're part of something bigger than just a gym. I get messages from people all the time telling me how much we've changed their lives. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were so many moments when I wanted to give up. But every time I felt like throwing in the towel, I reminded myself of why I started. It wasn't for the money or the fame. It was to build something that would last, something that would help people. And looking back now, I wouldn't change a thing. Sometimes, I still catch myself thinking about that little town I grew up in and how far I've come since then. But the truth is, I'm just getting started. I was 26 when I decided to quit my job and start my own business. I had always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but for the longest time, I had convinced myself that I wasn't cut out for it. I worked in a corporate job in a small marketing firm, and I was doing okay. I had a steady paycheck, benefits, and a predictable routine. But, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, is this it? Is this all I'm meant to do? It wasn't that I hated my job. I just didn't feel fulfilled. I wanted something more. I wanted to build something of my own. The idea of having the freedom to make decisions, control my own destiny, and not be bound by someone else's rules was incredibly appealing. But I had no idea how to get started. My journey to entrepreneurship began one night when I was talking to my cousin, Sarah. She had just quit her corporate job to launch a small e-commerce business, and she seemed to be thriving. Her energy was infectious, and she encouraged me to take the plunge as well. "What's the worst that could happen?" she asked. "You try, and if it doesn't work out, you go back to working for someone else. But you'll never know if you don't try." Her words stuck with me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the worst thing that could happen was that I would spend the rest of my life wondering, what if? So, I took the leap. I didn't have a clear plan in mind, but I knew I wanted to get into the health and wellness industry. I had always been passionate about fitness, healthy eating, and overall well-being, so it felt like a natural fit. My first idea was to launch a line of organic protein powders, but I quickly realized that the market was saturated. There were already too many well-established brands out there. I needed to find a niche. I spent months researching, brainstorming, and testing ideas. During that time, I stumbled upon a gap in the market. People were increasingly interested in plant-based diets, but there weren't a lot of high-quality, convenient options for those who were just starting out. Most plant-based products were either bland or had questionable ingredients. That's when it hit me. I could create a line of plant-based snacks that were not only healthy, but also delicious. The key would be to make them as convenient as possible without compromising on quality. I started small, making samples in my kitchen. At first, it was just me, a blender, and a few ingredients that I had researched online. I experimented with different flavors, textures, and recipes. Some were disasters, while others were surprisingly good. I remember the first time I made a batch of energy bars that actually tasted decent. I thought to myself, maybe this could actually work. The next step was sourcing ingredients and creating a brand. I didn't have a lot of money to invest, so I started by reaching out to suppliers and negotiating the best prices for high-quality, organic ingredients. I spent countless hours on the phone, emailing potential suppliers, and trying to figure out how to keep my costs low while still offering a premium product. I also worked on branding. I wanted my company to feel fresh, modern, and approachable. I hired a freelance graphic designer to create a logo and packaging that would appeal to my target audience. Busy, health-conscious individuals who cared about what they were putting into their bodies but didn't have time for complicated meals. Once I had a product I felt proud of, I launched a website and started marketing on social media. At first, it was slow. I had no followers, no customer base, and no idea how to get the word out. I was getting maybe 1 or 2 sales a week, which barely covered the cost of ingredients. But I wasn't ready to give up. I knew I had something good, and I was determined to make it work. I started reaching out to influencers in the health and wellness space, offering to send them free samples in exchange for honest reviews. Some said no, others didn't respond, but a few said yes. It was those early reviews that started to build momentum. Slowly but surely, I gained a small but loyal following. I kept reinvesting the money I made back into the business, improving the website, expanding my product line, and reaching out to more influencers. But the biggest turning point came when I decided to attend a health and wellness trade show. I didn't have a booth, but I knew it was a great opportunity to network and get in front of potential retailers. I remember walking around the event, trying to muster up the courage to approach big-name distributors. I was terrified. I felt like an imposter, but I pushed through. At the end of the day, I met someone from a well-known grocery chain who seemed genuinely interested in my product. We exchanged contact information, and a few weeks later, I got an email offering to stock my product in several of their stores. I could hardly believe it. This was the break I had been waiting for. The next few months were a blur. I had to figure out logistics, production, and how to keep up with demand. I spent countless nights packaging products, answering customer emails, and trying to scale the business. There were times when I felt completely overwhelmed and wondered if I was in over my head. But I kept going. Every time I faced a challenge, I remembered why I started this journey in the first place. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that would have a positive impact on people's lives. Fast forward 2 years, and my business is thriving. I have a small team. Our products are in over 500 stores nationwide, and I've expanded into new markets. I've learned more than I ever could have imagined about business, marketing, and resilience. I've also learned that success doesn't come overnight, and that's okay. I still face challenges every day. There are always obstacles to overcome, but I've learned to embrace them. Entrepreneurship is a constant journey, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I started with nothing but an idea and a lot of uncertainty. Now, I'm living my dream, and I've never been more proud of what I've built. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that if you have a passion for something and you're willing to put in the work, you can make it happen. It's not about being perfect, it's about being persistent. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, I say go for it. Take the leap. The journey will be tough, but the rewards are worth it. And even if it doesn't work out the way you expect, you'll learn invaluable lessons along the way. The most important thing is to keep moving forward. Thanks for reading. I never thought I would become an entrepreneur. Growing up, I had always been the quiet kid in school, the one who kept his head down and didn't seek the spotlight. My parents were modest but hardworking, and they always preached the value of a steady job over chasing any sort of dream. For years, I believed them. My first job out of college was in sales at a small tech company. The work was fine, but it wasn't inspiring. I kept thinking there had to be more to life than just following the path laid out by others. That changed one night when I was hanging out with a couple of my old college friends. One of them, Mark, had just sold his first startup. He had a small fortune in his bank account, and the guy was living like he had figured out the secret to life. I remember that night clearly. We were sitting on a balcony overlooking the city skyline, and Mark said something that completely shifted my perspective. You don't have to wait for life to hand you something good. You can go out and create it, he said, half drunken but surprisingly profound. That statement haunted me for months. At the time, I had no idea what kind of business I could start, but I knew I couldn't ignore the idea of creating something of my own. So, I started reading books, listening to podcasts, and talking to anyone who would share their entrepreneurial experiences with me. I quickly realized that many successful entrepreneurs didn't start with big ideas. They started by solving problems they personally encountered. And that's when it hit me. I could try to create a product that would make life easier for people like me. I'd been struggling with a common problem for months. My laptop was constantly overheating. I tried using cooling pads and adjusting my work habits, but nothing seemed to work. One night, after a particularly frustrating experience with my laptop slowing down in the middle of a work project, I decided to do something about it. What if I could create a simple, affordable, and effective laptop cooling solution? There were some on the market, but nothing that seemed to really address the problem in a practical way. I didn't have a background in engineering or product design, but that didn't stop me. I spent the next few months sketching out ideas, researching how laptop cooling systems worked, and talking to engineers I found online. The first few prototypes were terrible. I remember one that looked like a jumbled mess of plastic and wires. It didn't cool anything, but every failure only made me more determined. I would visit local hardware stores to buy materials and tinker with my designs late into the night. There were countless times I wanted to give up, but I kept reminding myself that this was the path I had chosen. Eventually, after about 6 months of constant trial and error, I had a design that worked. It was sleek, portable, and actually kept the laptop cool for hours. I was ecstatic, but now came the real challenge: selling it. I had no experience with marketing, no website, and no customer base. I started small, creating a simple website using a cheap platform and investing in some online ads. I didn't have much money to spend, but I knew I had to get the word out. I also reached out to some tech influencers and offered them free samples in exchange for reviews. It was a slow start, but the sales began to trickle in. About a year into the business, things took off. A major tech blog did a review of my product, and it quickly went viral. Orders flooded in from around the world. I went from shipping products out of my apartment to renting a small warehouse to keep up with demand. I had to hire a few people, which felt surreal. At this point, I was starting to make real money, and I finally felt like the sacrifices were paying off. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Running a business meant dealing with the constant stress of customer service, inventory management, and marketing. There were weeks when I barely slept, juggling orders, emails, and trying to keep up with the day-to-day operations. I found myself working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, and there were times when I thought I was going to burn out. I had always been used to the predictable routine of my old job, but now I was in uncharted territory. Then, a year and a half into my business, a major setback occurred. A larger competitor launched a similar product that was cheaper and looked almost identical to mine. At first, I panicked. I thought my business was done. But after taking a step back and analyzing the situation, I realized something important. My product wasn't just about cooling a laptop. It was about providing a high-quality solution that customers could trust. I had spent so much time building a loyal following and creating a brand that stood for quality. I decided not to compete on price, but on value. I doubled down on improving my customer service, offering extended warranties, and emphasizing the premium materials used in my products. It worked. My customers appreciated the added value, and many of them stuck with me even though they could buy a cheaper version elsewhere. Slowly but surely, my brand began to regain its footing, and my sales increased again. I learned that competition wasn't the end. It was just part of the game. The key was to remain focused on what made your product unique and how you could keep improving it. By year 3, I had expanded my product line and had a team of 15 people working with me. I was no longer doing everything on my own, and that's when I realized something important. Entrepreneurship wasn't about being a lone wolf. It was about building a team and learning how to lead. I learned to delegate tasks, trust others, and accept that I couldn't do everything myself. My business began to run more smoothly, and I finally found the balance I had been searching for. I also began to give back to the community. I started a mentorship program for aspiring entrepreneurs, sharing my story and offering guidance to those who were just starting out. I realized that, while my journey had been filled with ups and downs, it was the people around me, my team, my customers, and the mentors I had met along the way that had helped me succeed. Looking back, I'm amazed at how far I've come. I went from an unsure kid with no real direction to an entrepreneur running a successful business. It hasn't been easy, and I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, but every step of the journey has been worth it. I never imagined that a simple frustration with my laptop would lead to something so big, but sometimes the best ideas come from the problems we face every day. Now, I'm living a life I never thought was possible. I wake up every day excited to work on my business, and I'm constantly looking for new ways to improve and grow. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't about taking huge risks or having a revolutionary idea. It's about persistence, learning from failure, and being willing to adapt. And most importantly, it's about believing in yourself, even when everyone else tells you to play it safe. I don't think I would have become an entrepreneur if I hadn't had that conversation with Mark. But that one moment, that one push to start creating something, changed everything. Sometimes, all it takes is the belief that you can build something of your own to turn your life around. I was 25 when I decided to take the plunge. Fresh out of college, I'd been bouncing around different odd jobs for years, never really satisfied with the corporate grind. I knew I wanted to work for myself, but I didn't know how. Everyone around me was busy talking about their 9 to 5 jobs, promotions, and the real world, while I felt stuck in a loop that didn't seem to lead anywhere. The idea for my business came completely out of left field. It wasn't something I'd planned for or thought about deeply. One night, after a couple of beers with my friends, we were talking about how difficult it was to find unique gifts for people who seemed to have everything. The conversation went on for a while until someone jokingly said, "What if there was a website where you could personalize gifts, like turning a regular mug into a quirky, custom design?" At that moment, something clicked in my brain. The idea seemed so simple yet so brilliant. I could create a platform where people could design their own gifts, custom prints, mugs, t-shirts, phone cases. The possibilities were endless. It was something that hadn't been fully tapped into in the way I imagined. Personalized gifts were popular, but I didn't know of any major players that really focused on customization to the degree I was thinking. I didn't waste time. The very next day, I started doing research. I spent weeks reading articles, watching YouTube tutorials, and consuming anything I could about e-commerce and personalized products. The more I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't some wild fantasy, it could actually work. Sure, I didn't have any experience in graphic design, product manufacturing, or running a business, but I figured I'd learn along the way. One of the biggest hurdles was securing funding. I didn't have a rich uncle or any investors willing to take a chance on a 25-year-old with no prior business experience. I didn't even have much money saved up. I had student loans and rent to pay. My first instinct was to ask my parents for help, but I quickly ruled that out. They had already helped me get through college, and I wasn't about to ask them for more. That's when I turned to credit cards. I know, it's risky, but at that moment, it seemed like my only option. I maxed out 2 cards, one for inventory, the other for website development. I didn't have much of a backup plan, but I was determined. I had to build the website myself. I had no formal coding knowledge, so I turned to Shopify, which seemed like the easiest route for an amateur. I spent hours on forums, reading blogs, and piecing things together. Eventually, after weeks of late nights and trial and error, I managed to launch the website. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. I then needed to source products. I reached out to a few manufacturers and started ordering samples, trying to find the best quality at a reasonable price. It was a tedious process, and I wasn't making money yet, but I kept pushing. Finally, I settled on a few suppliers and began creating designs to offer customers. The first few months were brutal. I barely made enough money to cover the cost of running the site, let alone pay myself. My friends were supportive but skeptical. Every time I updated them on the status of the business, they'd look at me with those, "You're still doing that," faces. I couldn't blame them. The numbers didn't look great. I was in debt, my website traffic was minimal, and I had a very limited customer base. But I was too stubborn to give up. Then came my first breakthrough. I remember waking up one morning to an email from a customer who had ordered a custom mug for their mom's birthday. The email was full of praise for how well-made the product was and how much their mom loved the personalized design. I had a smile that couldn't be wiped off my face all day. I printed that email out and pinned it to the wall above my desk. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the next few months, I continued pushing. I refined my designs, worked on my website, and focused on driving traffic. I invested in Facebook and Instagram ads, but most of my marketing was word of mouth. I had my own personal social media profiles, and I'd use them to show behind-the-scenes looks at how products were made, sharing customer stories, and offering discounts to anyone who tagged their friends. Around the 6-month mark, I finally began to see some consistent sales. Not a lot, but enough to cover my expenses and maybe treat myself to a cheap dinner once in a while. I also started doing something that really worked. I focused on customer service. I sent personalized thank you cards with every order, I answered customer questions quickly, and I made sure to go above and beyond in ensuring every product was perfect. Then came my second breakthrough: influencer marketing. I had seen some brands growing fast by partnering with influencers, so I figured I'd give it a shot. I started reaching out to micro-influencers who had smaller followings but seemed like they genuinely appreciate my products. I sent out a few free items, and in exchange, they posted about my store on their Instagram pages. One of the influencers I worked with had a post go semi-viral. She was an artist who had a fairly niche following of around 10,000 followers, but that post got shared by several other pages, which led to a noticeable increase in traffic to my website. I wasn't raking in millions, but my sales were growing rapidly, and I could finally see a clear path forward. From there, it was a snowball effect. The more orders I got, the more feedback I received. I improved the site, I added new products, and I kept pushing to get more visibility. Eventually, I took out a small loan to invest in better equipment for handling the custom orders. I expanded my product line and hired my first employee, a graphic designer who helped me expand the range of designs on the site. Fast forward to today, and my business is no longer a side hustle. I have a team of 12 people, and we've expanded our operations to include a warehouse for fulfillment. We ship worldwide, and our products are featured in several major online marketplaces. Our revenue has grown 500% year-over-year for the past 2 years, and we're starting to gain serious recognition in the personalized products niche. I'm not saying I'm some sort of business genius. I'm still learning, and I know I have a long way to go. But looking back, I realized that the biggest key to my success was persistence. When everyone around me doubted me, when I didn't think I could make it another day, I kept going. So if you're reading this and thinking about starting something, take the leap. It's not going to be easy, but if you believe in your idea and are willing to do the work, you might just surprise yourself. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the idea of becoming a millionaire seemed as distant as landing on the moon. My parents weren't rich, but they were hardworking and taught me the importance of education and determination. Even as a child, I had an entrepreneurial streak. I would sell lemonade, candy, and even old toys from the garage to my neighbors. But those were just small-time ventures, not the stuff that would lead to a long-term business success. After high school, I went to college with the hope of becoming a lawyer. It felt like the right path. Everyone around me pushed me in that direction, teachers, friends, and even my parents. But deep down, I always knew something didn't feel right. I didn't have the passion for law that I thought I would. Instead, I found myself more interested in business classes and spending my nights reading about companies, investments, and marketing strategies. The idea of building something from nothing was thrilling to me. It wasn't until my junior year that I made a decision that would change everything. I switched my major to business. My parents were disappointed, and I could tell they thought I was making a mistake, but I knew I had to follow my gut. I graduated with a degree in business and got a job at a marketing agency in a big city. The salary wasn't anything to write home about, but it was a start. I figured I could use the experience to learn the ropes and eventually strike out on my own. But after a couple of years working at the agency, I became frustrated. I wasn't getting the responsibility or opportunities I'd hoped for, and I knew I wasn't going to grow any further if I stayed in that corporate environment. I spent every night working on side projects, learning new marketing techniques, and even trying to design websites and build simple brands. In 2015, after I'd saved enough money, I decided to take the leap and start my own business, a digital marketing agency. I didn't have a grand plan. I didn't have investors or a network of influential people. What I had was a simple website and a belief in myself. I started by reaching out to small businesses in the area, offering affordable marketing services. The problem was that nobody knew who I was. I sent cold emails, made phone calls, and attended local networking events. Most people ignored me, and the ones who didn't often didn't have the budget to hire me. I remember one of my first clients, a local coffee shop that agreed to hire me to handle their social media presence. They didn't pay much, but it was a start. The first 6 months were brutal. I had no idea how to get clients, and when I did land them, I struggled to deliver results. I'd spend hours tweaking Facebook ads, managing Google campaigns, and creating content, but I couldn't seem to find the magic formula. My friends and family told me to hang in there, but the doubt started to creep in. Was this really going to work? Was I chasing an impossible dream? But one thing I learned in those early months was the power of persistence. I kept learning, kept experimenting, and kept refining my process. I spent my weekends reading about digital marketing trends and testing out new strategies. Slowly but surely, things began to click. I started landing a few bigger clients, and with each success, my confidence grew. By the end of 2016, I was able to hire my first employee, a talented graphic designer who helped me with branding and visuals. Having someone to help with the creative side was a game changer, and it allowed me to focus on building the business. By 2017, I had a small but growing client base. My agency was starting to get noticed, and I could afford to invest in better tools and software to streamline my workflow. I was learning about SEO, pay-per-click advertising, and content marketing, and I was seeing tangible results. My clients were happy, and word-of-mouth referrals started to come in. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that had real potential. Then, in 2018, things took a turn. One of my clients, a large e-commerce store, reached out to me and asked if I could take on a more significant role. They were planning to expand nationwide and needed someone to help them scale their marketing efforts. This was my big break. I'd been working with small local businesses up until this point, but this was a national brand with a substantial budget. I knew I couldn't screw this up. I poured everything I had into the project. I hired more employees, streamlined our processes, and worked day and night to create a marketing strategy that would blow them away. Over the next year, the e-commerce store saw a massive increase in sales. We tripled their online revenue in just 6 months, and their CEO was so impressed that they offered to invest in my agency. This was the moment when I realized that I wasn't just running a small business anymore. I had built something valuable. The investment from the e-commerce store helped propel my agency to the next level. We expanded our services, brought in more clients, and grew our team. By 2019, Creative Growth Marketing had become one of the leading digital marketing agencies in the country. We worked with Fortune 500 companies, launched national campaigns, and built a brand that was recognized for delivering results. But success didn't come without its challenges. There were sleepless nights, tough decisions, and moments when I wondered if I could continue to lead the company. As we scaled, I had to learn to delegate, trust my team, and adjust to the growing pains of running a larger business. There were times when I felt overwhelmed and unsure, but I reminded myself why I started this journey in the first place, to create something meaningful and to prove that anyone could achieve success, regardless of their background or resources. Today, Creative Growth Marketing has a team of over 50 employees, and we work with some of the biggest brands in the world. We've been able to expand into international markets, and our work has been featured in major media outlets. We've had our ups and downs, but I've learned that the key to success is persistence, learning from failures, and always striving to improve. If there's one piece of advice I can offer to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: never give up. The road will be tough, and you will face setbacks, but those moments of doubt are often the ones that lead to breakthroughs. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing forward. You never know when the next big opportunity will come, but if you're ready for it, it could change your life. It all started in the most unexpected way. I had always considered myself a fairly average person, nothing extraordinary about me. I wasn't a tech genius, nor did I come from a wealthy family with connections. I was just a guy who worked a 9 to 5 in a cubicle, punching out code for a mid-sized software company. Life was comfortable, but I felt like there had to be more to it than just following the same routine day in and day out. I'd been working at this company for 3 years when I first had the idea. I was sitting at my desk, struggling to meet a tight deadline. My desk was cluttered with papers, my email inbox was flooded, and the coffee I had been drinking all morning wasn't helping with my brain fog. Then it happened. Another reminder popped up on my calendar, yet another meeting that I had to attend where I'd be talked at for an hour about things that barely concerned me. As the meeting droned on, I thought about how much of my life was spent in these meaningless exchanges. I realized something: I wasn't fulfilled. And that's when the idea came to me. What if I could create a company that helped people like me? People who felt stuck and uninspired at their jobs, to regain control of their lives? But, of course, I didn't act on it immediately. My first instinct was to shake off the idea, tell myself it was a pipe dream, and go back to work. But the thought stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if I could start something that gave people the tools to change their lives? Something that could help people break free from the monotonous routine of office life. Maybe I wasn't meant to be stuck behind a desk forever. Maybe I was meant to build something. The first step was to identify the problem I wanted to solve. I started talking to friends, colleagues, and even random people I met on social media about their work frustrations. What I learned was that so many people were feeling the same way I did, stuck in jobs they hated, with no real way out. The thing that stood out to me was how many people felt trapped in a cycle of unfulfilling work, but they didn't know how to escape. That was my aha moment. I realized I could build a platform that helped people transition from jobs they hated to careers they actually wanted. I didn't have all the answers at that point, but I knew the world didn't need another generic career advice website. It needed something that actually helped people make real, tangible changes. I began my research into the self-help and career coaching industry. It was massive, with thousands of books, blogs, and podcasts dedicated to personal development and career success. But something was missing. No one seemed to be addressing the emotional side of career transitions. People needed more than just tips on how to write a resume or how to ace an interview. They needed the confidence and clarity to actually take the leap. After months of planning, I decided to take the plunge. I quit my job. It was terrifying. I had no savings to fall back on, no investors, and absolutely no experience in running a business. All I had was an idea and a gut feeling that this could work. I spent the next few months building a website and trying to figure out how I could create content that resonated with my target audience. I taught myself everything I could about website design, SEO, marketing, and social media. I learned how to record and edit videos, write compelling copy, and build email lists. It was overwhelming, but it was also exciting. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive. The first few months were rough. I had a small, loyal audience, but I wasn't making any real money. I had to hustle. I worked 18-hour days, sometimes even 20, just to get my platform off the ground. I would spend hours writing blog posts, creating free resources, and offering one-on-one coaching sessions to build up my reputation. There were days when I questioned whether this was all worth it. I was making barely enough to cover rent, and I had no idea how to scale. But every time I received a message from someone telling me how my content had helped them, I was reminded why I was doing this. After almost a year of grinding, something clicked. I had been hosting webinars and offering free workshops to build my audience, and one of those workshops went viral. People loved the practical advice and personal stories I shared, and my email list grew exponentially overnight. I took the feedback from my audience seriously and began offering paid courses. It wasn't a huge amount at first, but it was enough to keep me going. The more I worked on creating valuable content, the more my business started to grow. Slowly, I started seeing the results of all my hard work. By year 2, I was able to hire a small team of people to help me manage the content, customer service, and marketing. With their help, I was able to focus on scaling the business. I invested in paid ads, launched an affiliate program, and continued to improve the courses and resources I offered. Things started to take off in a way I hadn't anticipated. The platform went from being a small blog to a full-fledged online academy, helping thousands of people each month. I started working with other coaches and experts in the field, offering them a platform to teach their own courses. My team expanded, and I finally had the freedom I had been craving. But just as things were going well, I faced another setback. I received a cease and desist letter from a competitor. They claimed that some of my content was too similar to theirs, and they threatened legal action. I was furious. Here I was, working day and night to build something meaningful, and now someone was trying to tear it all down. For a moment, I thought about giving up. But then I remembered why I started this in the first place. I wasn't doing it for the money or the recognition. I was doing it because I genuinely wanted to help people. So I fought back. I consulted with a lawyer and went through the proper channels to resolve the issue. It wasn't easy, but in the end, I won. That experience taught me an important lesson. If you believe in your vision and stand by your work, you can overcome even the toughest obstacles. Now, 5 years into my entrepreneurial journey, I can honestly say I've never been happier. I've built something that not only supports me financially, but also helps thousands of people every day. I've created a community of individuals who are passionate about making changes in their lives. It hasn't been a smooth ride by any means. There have been countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and financial struggles, but it's all been worth it. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't just about having a great idea or working hard. It's about persistence, resilience, and never losing sight of your vision. Looking back, I'm amazed at how far I've come. I was once just another guy stuck in a cubicle, dreaming about a better life. Now, I'm living that dream, and I'm helping others do the same. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the only thing standing between you and your goals is the willingness to take that first step, no matter how scary or uncertain it may seem. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. In fact, growing up, I didn't have a clue what the word even meant. I had the typical safe career goals: doctor, lawyer, maybe even an engineer. But life has a funny way of pushing you toward the unexpected. Sometimes it's a personal loss, a random encounter, or just a series of failures that turn your world upside down and force you to reconsider everything. That's how my story of entrepreneurship began. It all started during my senior year of college. I was studying business management, but honestly, I was coasting through. I wasn't passionate about my courses. I wasn't in love with the idea of working for someone else, but I didn't know what else to do. My friends were excited about entering the job market, internships, and corporate life. I didn't share the same enthusiasm. The turning point came in a conversation with my best friend, Michael. He was always the one with wild ideas, whether it was starting a band or creating a mobile app for food delivery. One day, he casually dropped a bombshell. What if we started our own company? I laughed it off, but Michael kept pushing. No, really. Think about it. We could start small. Just a side hustle at first. I wasn't convinced, but the thought stuck in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like a challenge I could embrace. The problem was, we didn't have a clear idea of what to do. But Michael wasn't the type to let a lack of clarity stop him. He just needed a nudge to go all in. One evening, we were hanging out in his apartment, scrolling through Reddit, where else, and we stumbled upon a post about people successfully building dropshipping businesses. It was like a light bulb went off. We didn't know much about dropshipping, but it seemed like a low-barrier way to get started in e-commerce. We spent the next few weeks learning everything we could about it, from suppliers to digital marketing. There were nights we stayed up until 3 a.m. watching YouTube tutorials and reading blogs. We were obsessed. After getting a crash course in the basics, we were ready to launch our first online store. I won't lie, the initial excitement quickly turned into a reality check. Our first website was a disaster. It was clunky, poorly designed, and hardly functional. The product we were selling? A random assortment of phone accessories. We thought it was going to be the next big thing, but it was a flop. We didn't give up, though. We didn't have the luxury of quitting. Our families were skeptical, our friends were questioning our decisions, and the money we had sunk into the business was quickly disappearing. But we learned from each mistake, each failure, and started refining our approach. In the next few months, we rebranded. Instead of trying to sell generic products, we focused on finding niche items we could market more effectively. We researched what was trending, looked for unique products, and tried to build a brand. Our second attempt at a store was still rough around the edges, but it was miles better than our first. The breakthrough came when we decided to focus on one particular product that we thought had potential, a custom-designed ergonomic office chair. We had noticed that remote work was becoming more popular, and people were investing more in their home offices. We sourced a unique ergonomic chair from a manufacturer in China that could be customized with different fabrics and colors. It wasn't just another office chair. It was a product that could appeal to people working from home who wanted to improve their comfort and productivity. We launched the chair on our website with a flashy marketing campaign. We targeted remote workers, freelancers, and people looking to upgrade their home office setups. Our ads were on Facebook, Instagram, and Google. And to our surprise, people started buying. Slowly at first, but then more frequently. It was a mix of luck and timing, but we were finally seeing some traction. From there, the momentum built. We improved the website design, added more products, and streamlined our operations. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were issues with suppliers, delays in shipping, and customers who weren't happy with their products. We had to deal with chargebacks, refund requests, and angry emails. But we didn't let it discourage us. We learned how to handle customer service, how to build a stronger relationship with our suppliers, and how to optimize our marketing campaigns. By the end of that first year, we had made over $100,000 in revenue. It wasn't the millions we dreamed of, but it was enough to get us excited about the future. We reinvested every cent back into the business, constantly trying to improve our marketing and expand our product range. The following year, things really started to take off. We moved into a small office space, hired our first employee, a customer service rep who helped us keep up with the growing demand, and began experimenting with other marketing channels. We even started running influencer marketing campaigns, collaborating with YouTubers and Instagram influencers who aligned with our brand. One of the biggest challenges during this time was scaling. As we grew, so did the complexity of managing inventory, fulfilling orders, and maintaining customer satisfaction. We had to implement systems and hire more staff to keep up with demand. But the reward was worth it. By the third year, we were pulling in 6 figures every month. But there's a dark side to entrepreneurship that many people don't talk about. The pressure is constant. The stress is real. There are days when you're running on fumes, wondering if the next challenge will be the one that breaks you. There were nights when I lay awake in bed, thinking about all the things that could go wrong, a supplier pulling out, a shipping crisis, or worse, a PR disaster. And don't even get me started on the imposter syndrome. Even when things were going well, I sometimes questioned if I deserved any of it. But through all the highs and lows, I've learned one thing: persistence is everything. Every failure, every setback, every sleepless night was worth it. If I had given up after the first, second, or even third failure, I wouldn't be where I am today. Now, 5 years after we started, our company is $1 million business. We've expanded into new product categories, and our customer base is global. We've even started a second company in a completely different industry, but that's another story for another time. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment because it will never come. Start small, learn from your mistakes, and keep going, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. It won't be easy, but if you're persistent enough, the rewards will be worth it. And if you ever doubt yourself, just remember that even the biggest companies started with a single idea and a lot of hard work. If I can do it, so can you. My story begins in a small suburban town where I grew up with big dreams and even bigger obstacles. My parents were hardworking immigrants, and while we had what we needed, money was always tight. I watched my parents work long hours at low-paying jobs, doing their best to make ends meet. They were incredibly supportive and always told me I could achieve anything I set my mind to. But I knew that the odds were stacked against me. I wasn't a child prodigy, I wasn't born with connections, and I definitely didn't come from wealth. But I had ambition, and that was something I was willing to rely on. When I was in high school, I got a part-time job at a fast food restaurant to help my parents out with some bills. I hated every minute of it. I hated the way the customers treated me, I hated the long hours, and I hated the lack of opportunities. But it was there that I had my first real entrepreneurial epiphany. I realized that if I wanted to change my life, I had to stop trading hours for dollars. I had to create something that worked for me, not the other way around. After high school, I went to college, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study. I initially chose business because it seemed like the safest option. But even in my freshman year, I felt disconnected. The classes felt theoretical and boring, and I could tell that I wasn't learning what I needed to build a real business. I decided to switch to a marketing major, which felt more aligned with my interests. I loved the idea of learning how to sell things, how to make a brand stand out, and how to persuade people to take action. But at the same time, I started working on my first entrepreneurial project, an online store selling custom t-shirts. It was a modest idea, but I thought it could work. I spent a lot of time researching how to source designs, how to set up an online store, and how to market it. It wasn't long before I realized how hard it was to get people to buy from me. I had a few friends who made orders, and I got excited, thinking I had a shot. But after a few months, I was barely breaking even. I wasn't making the money I had hoped for, and I started to feel like maybe the dream of entrepreneurship wasn't as simple as I thought. However, I didn't give up. In fact, I became obsessed with learning. I started reading books about business and marketing. I consumed every article I could find on starting a business, and I listened to podcasts, watched YouTube videos, and even took online courses. I realized that the problem wasn't with the product itself, but with my approach to marketing. I wasn't targeting the right people, and I wasn't offering enough value. Around this time, I got an internship at a digital marketing agency, hoping it would give me more hands-on experience. The work wasn't glamorous, doing research, writing blogs, handling customer inquiries, but it was a crash course in how businesses were using the internet to grow. I watched how companies used Google Ads, how they leveraged social media to build audiences, and how they optimized their websites to convert visitors into customers. Everything clicked. I knew this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. At the end of my internship, I was offered a full-time job at the agency, and I took it. My salary was decent for someone just starting out, but it wasn't life-changing. I moved into a small apartment in the city and threw myself into my work. I learned everything I could about digital marketing, particularly paid advertising, SEO, and conversion rate optimization. I got to work with big brands, and I slowly started to see the impact of my work. I became good at what I did, but something still gnawed at me. I didn't want to work for someone else forever. I had this itch to start my own company. In 2016, after 2 years of working at the agency, I decided to take the plunge. I saved up enough money to last for a few months without a paycheck, and I quit my job. I wanted to start my own digital marketing agency. At the time, it felt like an insane decision. I had no clients, no reputation, and no real business plan. But I figured I had nothing to lose. I could always go back to a 9-to-5 job if things didn't work out. The first few months were rough. I spent countless hours on the phone, sending cold emails, and trying to network. But nobody was interested. My portfolio was thin, and my credibility was non-existent. I was burning through my savings, and the pressure was mounting. I started wondering if I had made the wrong choice. Maybe I was just another dreamer who wasn't cut out for this life. But I didn't give up. I doubled down on learning. I reached out to anyone who would listen, offering my services for free or at a steep discount. Slowly, I began landing small clients. The first big break came when I landed a local restaurant chain that wanted help with its social media and online presence. It wasn't a huge contract, but it was a start. I used the project to build my portfolio and gain more experience. By 2018, my reputation had grown, and my agency was slowly picking up steam. I had enough clients to bring on a small team, and we started seeing tangible results. We helped businesses grow their online presence, increase their sales, and gain new customers. I was finally starting to feel like my hard work was paying off. By 2019, my business was thriving. I had expanded my team, and we were working with bigger clients, some of which were national brands. The key to my success was focusing on results. I never promised clients what I couldn't deliver, and I always aimed to over-deliver. Word-of-mouth referrals began to flood in, and I started hiring more people to help manage the growing demand. By 2021, my agency was making over $1 million in revenue. We had grown from just me and a laptop to a full-fledged team with offices and clients from all over the country. But it wasn't easy. There were moments when I thought about quitting, when I was exhausted, when I wasn't sure I could keep up with the demands of running a business. But every time I was on the verge of giving up, I remembered why I started, to build something that could provide me with the freedom and flexibility to live life on my own terms. Now, my agency is considered one of the top digital marketing firms in the industry. We have a diverse client base, and our team is more talented than I ever could have imagined when I was just starting out. My story isn't one of overnight success. It took years of hard work, failure, and perseverance. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that anything is possible if you're willing to put in the effort and never give up. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.